Katie Wilson and you're watching A News. Now, let's take a look at today's top stories. Moscow and Kyiv are reviewing new US-backed peace proposals with further talks expected. The death toll from Hong Kong's high-rise fire has risen to 128, with many still missing. And Pope Leo holds prayers in Istanbul and meets with the Catholic community in his first foreign visit. First this evening, the United States, Russia and Ukraine appear to be moving into a fresh phase of diplomacy, with all sides signalling their positions after a week of discussions in Geneva. President Vladimir Putin said a draft framework emerging from the talks could form the basis of future negotiations, but maintained that any agreement would require Ukraine to give up territory currently claimed by Moscow.
Moscow and Kyiv confirmed that new US-backed proposals are being reviewed and that another round of talks is expected in the coming days. Russian President Vladimir Putin said the revised US plan, shaped after meetings in Geneva, could serve as a basis for future agreements, but stressed that no final version exists yet.
We discussed it with US negotiators before my visit to Alaska. As I understand, they decided that all 28 points should be grouped into 4 separate components. In general, we agree that it can be used as a basis for future agreements, but it will be impolite on my part to speak about any final versions, because there are none.
Putin also repeated that Ukraine's leadership has, in his view, lost legitimacy and suggested it makes negotiations difficult.
It is pointless to sign documents with Ukrainian leadership. I think that Ukrainian leadership made a strategic mistake when they feared to hold presidential elections. The president lost his legitimacy after that.
He added that the status of Crimea and Donbass remains one of the key issues in discussions with the United States. Meanwhile, in Kyiv, President Volodymyr Zelensky said Ukrainian and US delegations will keep working on the Geneva framework and confirmed further high-level talks next week.
Our team, together with American representatives this week, will continue to push forward the points that we worked out as a result of talks in Geneva to shape them so that we reach the path to peace and security guarantees. Next week, not only our delegations will have important talks, but also myself. We are preparing a firm ground for such talks. Ukraine will stand on both its feet and will do so always.
Ukrainian president also said sanctions pressure on Moscow must continue.
If Putin doesn't want to stop the sanctions, they shouldn't stop. Priorities are clear: to hit Russian oil, their technological aptitude, their finances, their assets, which are working for the Russian war machine.
Talks between the Ukrainian and US delegations are scheduled to continue, alongside a planned visit by US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff to Moscow.
Well, the US has shared with Russia the parameters of the plan agreed with Kyiv in Geneva. The plans will be the subject of talks in Moscow next week with representatives from the US administration. Dasha Chernyshova has more from Moscow.
Russia says it has received the key parameters of a draft peace plan agreed in Geneva between the United States and Ukraine. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov says that they will become subject of the negotiations that will be held in Moscow next week with the representatives of the US administration. Earlier, Moscow confirmed that the US envoy Steve Witkoff is expected in Russia for talks. Peskov said that everything would be discussed, including the issues of the borders of the territories from which Russia demands the Ukrainian troops to withdraw, as well as who should recognize the so-called territorial realities between Russia and Ukraine. Moscow also insists that there are problems with the legitimacy of the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and what Moscow calls his unwillingness to hold elections and comply with the constitution. But Peskov says that everyone has a desire and preference to bring everything into a peaceful direction. In the meantime, Moscow says it continues to make advances on the battlefield And the MOD reported that over the past week, its armed forces took control over 8 settlements in the Donetsk People's Republic, Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia regions. They also carried out 1 massive and 6 group strikes against the Ukrainian military-industrial complex in response to the attacks against the civilian infrastructure in Russia. Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow for E! News.
Beyond the diplomatic efforts to end the war in Ukraine, Russia is now facing a surge in drone strikes targeting its energy infrastructure. Recent Ukrainian attacks have sparked fires and disrupted operations at several key refineries and ports. Here's more.
Ukraine has ramped up attacks on Russian energy and oil facilities throughout 2025, targeting sites deep inside Russia. Ukrainian drones have repeatedly struck refineries, oil depots, gas plants and related infrastructure.
I spoke with Commander-in-Chief of Ukrainian Army Oleksandr Syrsky, in particular, about our long-range strike capabilities. There is an increase in both the distance and the accuracy of our long-range sanctions against Russia. In fact, every day or every other day, there are strikes on Russian oil refining, and this works to bring Russia back to reality.
The most frequently targeted locations have been Krasnodar, Novorossiysk, Kursk and Crimea. Fires, explosions and operational suspensions have been reported at these locations, though casualties have generally been low. The attacks have affected both civilian and military-linked infrastructure, including gas processing plants, fuel warehouses and military airfields. Video and satellite images shared on social media and by authorities show plumes of smoke, flames and emergency crews responding to the incidents. Some strikes, like those on Novorossiysk, Russia's major Black Sea oil port, caused temporary suspensions of exports, highlighting the strategic impact of Ukraine's campaign. Russian officials have reported many drones being destroyed, though Ukraine continues to target key energy nodes due to their role in supporting Moscow's war effort. Experts say these attacks mark a sustained campaign to disrupt Russian energy supplies and logistics, while demonstrating Ukraine's growing reach and precision with drone operations deep inside Russian territory.
Russian President Vladimir Putin met with Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban in Moscow today. The two leaders discussed crude oil supplies for Hungary. Orban has long argued that Russian energy imports are indispensable for his country's economy, warning that switching to fossil fuels sourced elsewhere would trigger an immediate economic collapse. They also discussed peace efforts in Ukraine, during which Putin informed Orban that he would still consider meeting President Trump in Budapest following their previously cancelled meeting. To other news now, and one of the National Guard members who was shot near the White House on Wednesday has died. Sarah Beckstrom was 20 and passed away from her wounds on Thursday evening. National Guard members and various other agencies stood by to salute a convoy of vehicles. Her body was escorted from MedStar Medical Center to the Capitol's Medical Examiner's Office. A defense official confirmed that US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth attended the transfer. President Trump says her fellow Guardsman Andrew Wolf is fighting for his life. He added that the gunman is also in a serious condition.
She's just passed away. She's no longer with us. She's looking down at us right now. Her parents are with her. It's just happened. She was savagely attacked. She's dead. She's not with us. Incredible person. Outstanding in every single way, in every department. Just horrible. As you know, the other young man is fighting for his life. He's in very bad shape. He's fighting for his life, and hopefully we'll get better news with respect to him. And the monster that did this is also in serious condition.
Well, the Trump administration is introducing sweeping new immigration measures after the National Guard soldier was fatally shot near the White House. President Trump says migration from all so-called third world countries will be permanently paused, and green cards issued to certain nationalities will undergo a full security review.
US President Donald Trump has announced that his administration will permanently pause migration from all third world countries after a National Guard member was fatally shot near the White House. The administration also ordered a full-scale review of all green cards issued to nationals from what it calls countries of concern. Immigration officials say the full list will be assessed as part of broader security checks. In posts on his social media platform, Trump said he will end federal benefits for non-citizens, reverse immigration approvals issued under the Biden administration, and deport foreign nationals deemed security risks or public charges. US authorities have detained an Afghan national in connection with Wednesday's shooting. Officials say the suspect previously worked with American forces and entered the United States earlier this year under an asylum program. US Citizenship and Immigration Services says Afghan immigration processing has been halted indefinitely, with a review of recent entrants now underway.
Turning to East Asia now, and the scale of the Hong Kong apartment fire is becoming clearer as emergency teams push deeper into charred tower blocks that burned for more than a day. The death toll has more than doubled, currently at 128, with many still missing.
Firefighters in Hong Kong spent a second day battling a massive fire at a high-rise apartment complex on Friday. The death toll has now climbed to 128 people, and the number of injured has reached 76. Around 900 residents were moved to temporary shelters overnight. The blaze swept through 7 of the 8 tower blocks in the Tai Po district on Wednesday and is now under control, officials said. However, it remains unclear how many people are still missing. Hong Kong leader John Lee said on Thursday that authorities had lost contact with 279 people earlier in the day. No updated figures on the missing were provided at a press conference later that afternoon. Authorities say the operation is now shifting from firefighting to a full search and rescue effort.
Our firefighting operation is almost complete. Despite that, we are still carrying out firefighting operation to 4 individual units, and damping down to various units of the 7 blocks are still in progress, so as to prevent the debris and embers from flaring up. What's next is the search and rescue operation. We will conduct search and operation to the remaining 25 assistant corps, and at the same time we will endeavor to effect forcible entry to all the units of the 7 blocks concerned, so as to ensure that there are no other possible casualties.
Meanwhile, attention is turning to how the disaster began. Officials have launched a criminal investigation, saying highly flammable styrofoam used in renovation work helped the fire spread rapidly. 3 people, 2 company directors and a consultant from the contractor responsible for the renovations have been arrested on suspicion of manslaughter.
After the break, we'll have more on the US immigration policy following the National Guard attack in Washington, D.C. See you shortly. Welcome back to A News. Now, a shooting near the White House by an Afghan national has prompted US authorities to indefinitely halt immigration requests from all Afghan applicants, a move that has sparked widespread concern among refugees and human rights organisations. To discuss the implications of this, we're joined by John Kavalik, Senior Editor at The Issue Insight. Thank you for being with us. Now, what does the US decision to suspend all Afghan immigration requests signal about the government's priorities on national security versus refugee protection?
You know, the focus now, because of the death of this young woman, and unfortunately, we're talking politics, and you have to look at it in the political context. And the political context is, for President Trump, you have a young woman who's attractive, serving in the National Guard, and she is murdered by a citizen of Afghanistan. And so all of those just add and play into how he views immigration, how he views migration, how he views people from other countries, and particularly how he views anything that connects with the Biden administration. And of course, the withdrawal from Afghanistan is the Biden administration. The process by which this gentleman entered the United States is more Biden administration than Trump administration, but there's connectivity with both. But for President Trump, this is sort of aligning all of his basic instincts for directing the political debate. And in the US today, it's very difficult for anyone to take a position different than the one he has, even though organizations will and religious groups will be concerned that this is throwing the baby out with the bathwater, that one person has done something horrible and now we're going to indict everyone else. But for President Trump, with his migration policy in general, which is close the borders, get illegals out of the US, this gives him a really strong political gift.
Now, some of these Afghan applicants who were waiting include journalists and those who worked with the US. Where does this leave them?
In a bad place. I actually know the person at the State Department that's been directing a lot of the Afghans, particularly the women, children coming into the U.S. And this is now going to be guilt by association. This is simply going to be, if going through the alphabet A to Z, A, Afghanistan. If you've got connectivity to Afghanistan, you are not only unlikely to come to the United States during the next 3 years and 2 months of the Trump administration, but if you're here now, you may very well be rounded up despite having all the documentation, despite not having done anything wrong, but you are now going to be lumped in Afghanistan, Taliban, terrorist, bad people, Muslims embracing the Quran and Sharia law, just everything negative. So this is going to be a really ugly period. And we're coming out of Thanksgiving holiday month. We've got the Christmas holiday. Congress still has to do budgeting. They're back for a short period of time, but this is basically going to dominate the news cycle.
So it sounds like this isn't going to be lifted anytime soon, but do you expect that this is a temporary move? And under what conditions might the US resume processing Afghan applications?
It's going to take a lot more than empirical evidence. This is now a political issue for President Trump. And we're now already focusing to November 2026, which are the midterm elections for the United States Congress. 435 members of the House, and we have a 100-member Senate. 33 of them are up every 2 years. And normally, under normal conditions, the party in power, the president's party, loses seats in the Congress, and sometimes control of the House or the Senate changes to the other party. So President Trump is going to be using this to not only solidify his base, but to gin up everything. And it's likely that Republicans will go along with him. So I don't see any political reason for the president to say this is temporary. This is one person who I think the president said he went nuts or he went crazy. I don't see where there's an upside for the president saying, we're going to do this review quickly. We're going to get back to normalcy with respect to immigration and migration. I think he's going to milk this for as much as possible and we're going to see it continue into 2026.
So if it does continue, what impact could this policy have on the region and regional stability, especially in those neighbouring countries hosting Afghan refugees who were counting on these resettlement pathways?
Simply put, I'm sorry to be flippant, they're out of luck. President Trump is not going to do anything where the perception of his base, his Make America Great Again base, or the Republican Party, he's not going to give any ammunition to anyone where he's going to say, well, I'm allowing people from here, I'm allowing people from there. He's going to want to just make this total, and he wants to look tough. President Trump is all about optics and performance, and everything's performative. So this gives him a moment he's already said, I'm sending more National Guard troops into Washington, D.C. I'm telling Department of Homeland Security, review everybody's green card. I want to check everybody. And now, if you're coming back into the U.S. from travel after Thanksgiving, you've gone somewhere, or you're planning to go somewhere for Christmas holidays, and you have a green card, maybe you're from one of these countries, or maybe marginal, you're going to be wondering, should I leave the U.S.? Maybe I should stay around. So the countries that have been working with the United States, as far as President Trump's concerned, they're now your problem, because I'm not going to let your problem become my problem.
A policy which could have a really big impact there. Now, moving on to other news. John, you're in Moscow, where Putin received Orban today. What's the latest from where you are?
Yeah, it was an interesting moment. It's been announced for a while. This is Prime Minister Orban of Hungary's second visit. The first visit very much upset his colleagues in the European Union. They denounced it. Then, of course, he's met with President Trump and gotten a one-year waiver from U.S. sanctions on imports of energy from the Russian Federation. And now he's in Moscow, he's got a big delegation, I think 10 or 11 ministers with him, and he's trying to solidify the sourcing of energy. And he's actually said it. My goal is to keep cheap oil coming into Hungary. He has an election next year in April, I believe. His party's not doing well right now. Hungary has a lot of issues. So he's trying to leverage the relationship with President Trump, the relationship with President Putin, and say, for the voters in Hungary, keep me going, keep me in office. So does he come away with anything? Probably, good. He's leaving with good words. He's leaving with appreciation for wanting to reach out and have dialogue. In some respects, part of the message that he's very subtly delivering is, look, I've been here twice. The Prime Minister of Slovakia has been to Russia since Russia invaded Ukraine on 24th of February 2022. Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, the Coalition of the Willing, maybe you all should visit Moscow too and try to convince this guy to stop the war.
So you mentioned that leverage there between Trump and Putin. Could this lead potentially to any progress in the peace process for Ukraine?
There's always a possibility. The summit that was canceled was in Budapest, Hungary, and that sort of unraveled as it should have unraveled, because Secretary of State Marco Rubio, in his final conversation with Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, Secretary Rubio came away from that conversation and said to the president, I know you want to do this, Mr. President. I know you feel confident that you can get President Putin to do what you want, but I have to tell you, from what I heard from Minister Lavrov, it's not going to result in what you need. I don't think it's a good idea for you to do this. And what was spectacularly important was, rather than President Trump go with his gut, which is, thank you, Marco, I've got it, I can convince him, we're best buddies, don't worry about it. President Trump said, all right, I'm going to listen to you. So the normalized diplomatic process that has been, that we count on for decades did work in this case. But, Prime Minister Orban, it's on the margins. Always in these kind of diplomatic meetings, there are opportunities where there are messages delivered quietly, and those are sometimes incredibly consequential. And they may be the most innocuous little note or little answer to a question that's just a little bit deviating from a previous answer. And it is possible that President Putin is going to use Prime Minister Orban to deliver something to President Trump. But if nothing else, what President Orban has done today is show the continuing fracturing within the European Union itself, and also show that he is a guy along the lines of President Erdogan of Turkey, someone who everyone will talk to. The question is, how much does it really matter? We don't know right now, but for him, it was a good day.
Certainly one to watch, isn't it? Thank you, John, for joining us on the programme and for all of your insights.
Thank you.
After the break, we'll take a look at the key stories shaping the region. Stay tuned. Welcome back to A News. Now, let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said nuclear negotiations with the United States are not possible at the moment as long as Washington is dictating its conditions to Tehran. But he confirmed that contacts are underway despite the standoff with Europe on Iran's nuclear program. Our correspondent Taraz Shiralilu has more.
Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said that it was not possible to resume mediated nuclear talks with the United States because Washington was laying down unacceptable preconditions, which he termed dictation of orders. Following a one-day visit to Paris on Wednesday to meet with French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot, Iran's top diplomat said he discussed in detail the nuclear issue with his French counterpart. Araghchi told the state IRIB TV on Thursday that he explained why balanced and fair negotiations are not possible at the moment due to the U.S. excessive demands, which he called a bullying approach. Araghchi also said he reiterated in Paris that negotiating is far from writing dictations and obeying the orders, but he did not elaborate on the U.S. conditions for a new round of talks. Washington has been demanding zero enrichment and limiting the range of Iran's ballistic missiles, both of which Tehran has categorically rejected as its red lines. Araghchi added that contacts are underway with ups and downs with European troika of France, Germany, and the UK, known as E3, over their dispute on Iran's nuclear program. Earlier, Iran had threatened that it would cut the talks with the European troika if the UN nuclear sanctions demanded by the E3 were reinstalled in September by the Security Council. In the meantime, E3 has echoed Washington's conditions in addition to demanding resumption of Iran-US talks, which turned the deadlock in the restart of negotiations into a gridlock. Last week, unconfirmed reports suggested that Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian, in a letter to Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, agreed with mediation of Riyadh between Tehran and Washington for resumption of the nuclear talks. However, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, in a televised speech on Thursday evening, rejected as a total lie reports on a back-channel message sent to U.S. via a third country. Taraz Shiralilu, Tehran, A News.
On the second day of his trip to Turkey, the leader of the Catholic Church, Pope Leo XIV, continues his programme of meetings and events. His four-day visit focuses on strengthening Christian unity and drawing attention to urgent humanitarian issues in the region.
Pope Leo continued his visit to Turkey on Friday with a stop at the nursing home of the Little Sisters of the Poor in Istanbul. It is the first overseas trip of the pontiff. Later in the day, he was welcomed with applause at the Holy Spirit Cathedral, where he met Turkey's Catholic community. Crowds gathered outside, many wearing shirts with his image, hoping for a glimpse of the pontiff.
I will be so happy to see Pope, and this is my first time, I can say, like, to have this opportunity in Turkey, of course. So, no words.
It is important for Turkey to unite at one table, Eucharistic table, and to pray together to one Father who is in heaven. I think it's also a very good time to think about our credo. What do we believe in?
Pope Leo again urged care for migrants in Turkey, which hosts nearly 4 million people from Syria, Afghanistan, Iran and Iraq. Supporting migrants has been a central theme of his 6-month papacy.
The significant presence of migrants and refugees in this country presents the Church with the challenge of welcoming and serving some of the most vulnerable. At the same time, this Church itself is made up largely of foreigners, and many of you, priests, sisters, and pastoral workers, come from other lands. This calls for a special commitment to enculturation so that the language, customs, and culture of Turkey become more and more your own.
The highlight of the visit will come when Pope Leo travels to Iznik, the ancient city of Nicaea. There he will mark the 1700th anniversary of the early church council that produced the Nicene Creed, a core statement of faith for Christians around the world. During his visit, the Pope will also meet Christian leaders from across the Middle East. He is expected to call for unity among churches long divided by history.
German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul has vowed closer cooperation with Ankara. He says the EU's $173 billion joint defence procurement programme, SAFE, should include key NATO partners like Turkey and the UK. Speaking at a joint news conference with his Turkish counterpart Hakan Fidan in Berlin, Turkey is a long-standing and reliable NATO ally and should be included in the EU's new defence programmes. He also added that they view Turkey as an important geostrategic partner and would like to open a new page in relations.
Turkey has become a key partner in many areas. It is therefore clearly in our interest to strengthen cooperation between the European Union and Turkey. Of course, this does not alter the fact that the Copenhagen criteria remain a binding prerequisite for accession to the European Union. Democracy, human rights and the rule of law are fundamental values for our European Union, and they are non-negotiable. But if Turkey wants to join the European Union, and I understand that this is Turkey's intention, then it will have a reliable and friendly partner in Germany. It is of course up to Turkey to emphasize that it wants to continue along this path. However, I am in favor of us, as the European Union, also reaching out to Turkey in this situation and strengthening the channels of communication. Now is the time to turn a new page.
The 7th ministerial meeting of the Turkic States Media Forum has concluded. The delegates adopted a joint communiqué setting out plans for resilient media, strengthened information security and closer cooperation across all member states. Our reporter Aytan Shukurova has more.
Baku is now on day 2 of the organization of Turkic States Media Forum, where the 7th meeting of ministers and high official in charge of media and information is currently taking place. The session opened with high-level remarks from senior representatives of the organization of Turkic states and member countries. The speakers highlighted the importance of deeper cooperation, strengthened information security and joint strategic communication initiatives across the Turkic world.
Medya sahəsi üzrə
Türk Devleti Teşkilatı ve ona üst devletlerin
An action plan for activities with the Turkic states organizations in the field of media has been approved. In 2025, Azerbaijan's cooperation with other Turkic states in the field of media has deepened significantly. A communique was adopted at the end of the meeting of the ministers and senior officials responsible for media and information, aimed at preventing disinformation.
itibarlı yanaşma üsulları müzakere olundu.
Kazakhstan is seeking to enhance cooperation among member states of the Organization of Turkic States in the fields of culture and information. Joint projects in information, media and culture are among the key tools for bringing the peoples of Turkic states closer together. These include series and programs showcasing the diverse nations, people, cultures, shared traditions, as well as landmarks, tourism sites, and cultural institutions of our countries.
In 2026, the Media Forum of the Organization of Turkic States, OTS, will be held in Turkey. From time to time, our countries are targeted by disinformation campaigns. For this reason, we are trying to deepen our cooperation in the fight against fake news. The communique adopted today, this cooperation has deepened further. According to the agreement, the first field trip is planned to Turkey. On this basis, another communique will be adopted, and relations between the peoples will be further strengthened there.
Final communique reflecting shared decisions, priorities and future commitments. I'm Ayten Shukurova with Elbrus Musayev and Zohrab Shirinov, A News.
Thousands are expected to take to the streets of Tbilisi as Georgia marks 1 year since the political dispute over the country's stalled EU negotiations. 2 separate marches will converge on Parliament tonight, with organisers calling the day a symbolic milestone in their ongoing movement. Our correspondent Nini Nikolaishvili has more.
Tonight in Tbilisi, 2 coordinated protest marches are set to converge on Parliament, marking 1 year since Prime Minister Irakli Qobakhidze's statement that EU accession negotiations wouldn't resume before 2028. An announcement that ignited a year-long wave of demonstrations demanding new elections and the release of detained protesters. At 7 p.m, citizens will begin marching from Tbilisi State University and from the old public broadcaster building before gathering here at Parliament an hour later. University professors, teachers, activists and representatives of several opposition groups have pledged to join the mobilization. Former President Salome Zurabishvili urged the public to participate, framing the day as a moment of unity and a stand for Georgia's European future. Government officials, however, accuse organizers of misrepresenting the causes of the stalled EU talks. Tbilisi Mayor Kahakaldze said that the protesters represent a political minority attempting to rearrange things by force, insisting that the country has grown stronger and more sovereign over the past year. Members of the ruling party maintain that the EU had paused negotiations months before Qobakhidze's initial statement, while opposition figures reject that claim, saying that the government is attempting to shift responsibility. As people prepare to gather once again, the day highlights not only the deep political divisions within the country, but also the competing visions for Georgia's path toward Europe. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Japan is preparing to host a landmark summit with the leaders of Central Asia, aiming to strengthen economic ties and cooperation in a rapidly changing geopolitical landscape. Our correspondent Fariza Kalamirzana has more on what this meeting could mean for the region and for Japan's role in Central Asia.
The government of Japan is planning to hold a summit with the leaders of Central Asian countries. According to Japanese media, the meeting may take place in Tokyo in December this year, but exact dates have not yet been announced. For 2 decades, Japan and the countries of Central Asia have cooperated within the Central Asia-Japan dialogue at the ministerial level. The upcoming summit will become the first ever meeting of leaders in an expanded format. Japanese media note that the states of the region maintain close ties with Russia and in recent years have intensified cooperation with China. And against this backdrop, Tokyo is seeking to strengthen its own engagement with countries that have significant natural resources. According to Japanese reports, Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi views the planned summit as an opportunity to broaden cooperation and enhance economic security. The summit was previously expected to take place in August last year in Kazakhstan to mark the 20th anniversary of the Central Asia-Japan dialogue. However, the visit of the Japanese delegation was cancelled following warnings of a possible powerful earthquake. Experts say that the initiative had indeed lacked additional momentum. Regional leaders held differing views on foreign policy priorities, and Japan's long period of economic stagnation limited its ability to pursue an active foreign investment policy. However, following Russia's military actions in Ukraine in February 2022 and the resulting escalation of the wider crisis, Japan and the countries of Central Asia found a pressing need to strengthen cooperation. Many Japanese companies began exiting the Russian market and shifting their focus towards Central Asia, creating new economic dynamics and forcing Tokyo to study the region anew. At the same time, the Central Asian states themselves started acting with a more unified voice. Japan is expected to propose joint initiatives for economic decarbonization and attract private investors for finance green projects. And if both sides manage to implement these plans, the upcoming Central Asia-Japan summit could become a significant step forward, giving new momentum to the development of the entire region. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A-News.
Well, we'll have more on that story on the cooperation between Central Asia and Japan right after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Japan is preparing to host the first ever Japan Central Asia Leaders Summit, aiming to elevate its long-standing dialogue with the region. Joining us now to unpack this story is Andrew Leung, international and independent China strategist. Thank you for joining us. Now, what's the main reason behind Japan holding its first Leaders Summit with Central Asian countries now?
It is a result of the current new first female Prime Minister of Japan rising to power. She represents the party that upholds Japan's claim to become a normal country, unfettered by Japan's wartime constitution, which restrained the projection of Japan's power, economic and military on the military field. And she wants to rearm Japan and exert Japan's influence both in the region and beyond. So I think this is the philosophy of her party, but more importantly, in regional dynamics, Japan feels more beholden to China's dominance over rare earths, and Japan wants to develop sources of supply with rare earths, particularly in Central Asia. And of course, this dialogue is not new, and you highlighted it earlier. There is a continuation of a dialogue between Central Asia and Japan, as Japan's businesses and investments are seeking new opportunities. So there are a number of dimensions there, but also because of the recent split between Japan and China over territorial disputes over the Senkaku or the Diaoyu Islands, and Takaichi's provocative remarks on Taiwan. And so Japan wants to widen its diplomatic network. And it's more or less the same thing applies to Russia as well, because there is a dispute between Russia and Japan over some islands north of Japan.
Now we heard from our correspondent there about the geopolitical environment, particularly after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. How has that reshaped Japan's approach to Central Asia?
Well, I think that Japan is always wants to see itself as a global power. Don't forget that before China's rise, Japan was regarded as number one. I mean, in the 1980s, I could still remember at that time, everything was about Japan. And of course, Japan has been had been the leader in technology, maybe about 20, 30 years ago. But of course, because of the rise of China and the relatively decline of the Japanese economy owing to its worsening demographics, that translates into a sense of frustration amongst the Japanese electorate. And now this frustration has now pushed the new prime minister to power, and it is her agenda, the agenda of her party, to reassert Japan's global influence, including, of course, in the Central Asia.
Now, Central Asian states have maintained their ties with Russia and expanded cooperation with China, as you mentioned. Where does Japan fit within that evolving regional balance?
Well, Japan, as I said, doesn't want to be locked out of the supply and value chain as far as rare earths, critical rare earths are concerned. And I think that this is a primary objective to secure supply of rare earths from Central Asia. And of course, from the point of view of Central Asian countries, the more investments from other countries, the better, rather than just depending entirely on China. Now, but there is a big difference between the connectivity of Japan with Central Asia and the connectivity of China with Central Asia. Now, Central Asia, of course, represents a landlocked countries. They've got no access to the sea, but the transportation of their minerals and goods have to rely on land transport. And of course, the direct link is to China. And Japan has got no direct land transport with Central Asian countries, and its trade has got to depend on, first of all, a shipment to China using China's rail and roads to transport the goods from Central Asia. But in spite of this barrier, Japan still wants to form good relations with as many countries as possible, particularly in Central Asia, where the source of essential commodities is a strategic consideration. It's a main strategic consideration as far as Japan's foreign policy is concerned.
But couldn't the region position itself as a Japan-linked gateway between East Asia and Europe? How realistic is that idea?
Well, as I said earlier, Japan is hampered by the lack of land routes, direct land routes from Japan direct to Central Asia. It's got to pass through China. Hence, just to gain equal influence with Central Asia, I think is a pipe dream, because China enjoys huge advantage with the Belt and Road Initiative, with the land routes through rails and road, various transport linking Central Asia countries to this supply to the production hub in China. After all, China is the world's largest manufacturer by far. Almost anything is produced now in China under the sun, even though China is not marked on these products, but China's components, minerals, spare parts are embedded in it. And of course, China also enjoys as the the center of the global supply and value chain, and also the central part of the global logistic hub. Don't forget that the world's 7 of the world's largest container ports out of the top 11 are in China, including Hong Kong. So I think that Japan cannot compare with China in terms of connectivity in Central Asia. But nevertheless, this is not stopping Japan from establishing or strengthening trade and investment relationship with Central Asia.
So what about decarbonisation and green projects? These are supposedly initiatives where Japan is planning to take the lead. Could this be industries where Japan will take the lead, and what could the benefits of those be to both sides?
I don't think that Japan is now in the lead, perhaps in certain technologies, but in terms of capacity, there is no doubt that China is has a dominant position. China supplies over, I think, 60 or 70% of the whole world's solar power.
But this must be benefiting Central Asia somehow. That they're going to Tokyo, taking part in this summit. What can they gain from this?
Of course, the green energy also translates into electric cars. And of course, China is the largest manufacturer of electric vehicles. And of course, for China to strengthen relationship with Central Asia, one of the likely development is for China to establish production facilities in Central Asia, producing electric cars, which bring jobs to Central Asia, which contributes to the local economy. But there is no doubt about China's dominant position in green energy. As I said, I mean, China dominates the whole world's green energy capacity in solar panels, in wind turbines, and in hydroelectric power. And in fact, as far as China's whole country is concerned,
we'll have to leave it there, Andrew. Thank you very much for joining us on the programme.
All right. Thank you.
That brings you up to date with world news for the hour. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News.